And now, God, open my mouth so that I can speak. Open our ears so that we can hear. And open our hearts so that we can change by your power and through your grace. Amen. Please be seated. Well, I thought last week's sermon was hard to prep for. Yikes. It felt daunting to know that there would be a lot of feelings swirling around this morning. Many of you will have come today curious to hear what I'll say. Some may even be concerned about what I'll say. And some will just be hoping I'll have something to say. And to that I say, me too. We gather this morning on the doorstep of Veterans Day, where we honor the service of all those who have given themselves to serve and preserve the ideals of our nation. And on the other side of an election that most everyone described as a fight for the soul of our nation. As expected, there are people across the nation rejoicing at the results and those that are grieving. Both are true here in our city, and both are true here in our congregation. Since the results became clear, I've heard from various members of this community who have reached out to express their hope, their grief, their fear, their anger, and disappointment. Would it surprise you to know that I've heard literally all of those emotions from people on all different points of the political spectrum in this community? It didn't really surprise me. I think that's partly because it's literally my job to know you, to know your stories, to know where you're coming from, and at least a little bit about what shapes your perspectives. I'm blessed because I occupy a unique role in the life of this community that allows me to do that. It's baked into the system. Yet, regrettably, I'm also aware that that's not so for everyone in the congregation. When we only see from one particular vantage point, it becomes easy to presume that we know what someone else is thinking and what they're all about. It becomes easy to say another person is wrong for not seeing it the way I do. It becomes a lot easier to dismiss people. If I only look through my lens and reject anything as valid in your perspective, then I don't have to extend myself to you. I don't have to consider what matters to you. I don't need to care about what serves you. I don't even have to see you. Not really, anyway. I believe this is very much what Jesus' reaction to the widow in today's gospel is all about. For weeks, we've been listening to Jesus talk to his disciples about his perspective on power. He's called them out more than a few times for their delusions of grandeur, their refusal to hear his message and accept that his ministry, the ministry he called them and us, for that matter, to share, has nothing to do with power over others and everything to do with connection, mutual care among all of God's people, and especially solidarity with the vulnerable, the outcast, and the hungry. He is remarkably consistent with this message in every telling of the gospel, so we have no reason to doubt it or question its veracity. Today, we find him in the temple, where he can't help but call out the hypocrisy of the scribes. By this point in the journey, he's not at all concerned with ruffling any feathers. As he sits opposite of the treasury, he sees a poor widow come in and give the only 2 coins she has, and he lifts up her action to the disciples. Since Mark takes the time to tell us about Jesus watching the treasury, I've always thought this was about her act of giving financially. Yet as I pictured Jesus sitting there watching, I found that I began to think about this woman and about her circumstances. This woman had been left behind. We're told that she was a poor widow. We can infer that when her husband died, there was likely no meaningful property left to her, no son to take care of her, no family to take her back in. She was alone and she was poor, which in the culture of her day placed her on the bottom rung of the social ladder, if that. Yet, there she was, doing the best that she could to contribute to the life of her community, though it seems that the community could not really care less for her. Not the leaders of her community, not her neighbors, no one. For all the long prayers of the scribes, the abundance of the rich people pouring large sums into the treasury, and the majesty of the temple, it didn't really seem like any of that was being leveraged to care for this woman. Still, she showed up. How reasonable it would have been for her to turn her back on the community that had turned its back on her. How reasonable it would have been to say, I am not giving any more of my dignity, any more of my money, any more of myself to you people, and certainly not to a God that has so clearly forsaken me. How reasonable that would have been, yet she did the exact opposite. And walked right smack into the heart of the community, and through her presence and her action says, I am here. I am a part of this community, and I am a part of you. I believe that is what we're really being called to look at here. It's not that she gave money, it's that she presented herself. The poverty she gives from is not merely financial poverty, but the relational poverty thrust upon her by a culture that felt she had nothing of value to offer and that it had no obligation to look out for her. And Jesus lifts her up to let her know that this could not be further from the truth. I believe it's her determination to remain connected that Jesus is most captivated by, and it's that kind of openness that Jesus is calling us to. Yesterday was our annual diocesan convention. There was a rousing sermon by the Reverend Norma Guerra during Eucharist, an address from Bishop Taylor, and later in the afternoon, a keynote address by the Reverend Dr. Carter Hayward, one of the original Philadelphia 11, the first 11 women ordained as priests in the Episcopal Church. While each approached it from a different angle, Reverend Norma's sermon, Bishop Taylor's address, and Dr. Hayward's keynote all called us to a place of realistic openness, to a place of relationship with those we disagree with, to a place of mutual respect. It's important to note that none of them called on anyone to abandon their convictions or to stop fighting for what they believe is right. It was clear, though, that they all understand on a deep and organic level that there is no way through this moment that we are living in that does not involve doing it together in community. But how do we do that? Perhaps we can start by acknowledging that most people are fundamentally good and desire to do good. It's too easy to paint those with whom we disagree with the broad brush of being unjust, uninformed, or just uncaring. If we spend all of our time looking for the worst in people, I guarantee you we will find it. Let's challenge ourselves to seek the best in those around us. I guarantee you we will find it. The next thing we can do is share our stories, not just our opinions. It's much harder to close yourself off to someone you actually know than someone you only think you know because you know something about them. When we hear each other's stories, we almost always find threads of commonality with our own, and that's when the seeds of relationship begin to sprout. Let's also try to remember that no one is ever just one thing. No one is just a Democrat or a Republican or just a parent or just a spouse or just a student or just an immigrant or black or gay or their gender. Human beings are complex and diverse and full of contradictions and surprises. Let's avoid trying to reduce each other down to unrealistically simple creatures. We are not. We never have been, and we never will be. Colin O'Leary served as a youth delegate representing our deanery at convention yesterday. Last night, we were driving home, and I asked him what was something important that he heard during the day that he was going to take with him. He didn't hesitate to answer. It was clear he had already been reflecting on this. He said, referring to Dr. Hayward's keynote, that you can't fight hate with hate. The only thing you can fight hate with is love. My friends, I believe this is one of the most true things that has ever been spoken. More importantly, I believe this was a fundamental point of Jesus' ministry, to banish hate through unconditional, unbound, unrelenting love. Perhaps you will all think that's pretty naive. I don't. I believe love to be the strongest, most life-giving force on heaven and on the earth. I refuse to allow anyone or anything to turn me into a person who hates. I pray that you all feel the same way too. As we begin our journey into the future, here's what I ask of you at this time. Don't stop talking to each other, even when it's hard. But more than talking to each other, friends, we have to actually listen to each other. We have to share our stories and ourselves, to open our hearts to each other. We have to try to see each other fully. I'll remind you again that our baptismal covenant binds us to God and to each other in a union of faith and common purpose. It is the most authentic expression of our episcopal identity, and it calls us to seek and serve Christ in all persons, to strive for justice and peace among all people, to respect the dignity of every human being. There can be no exceptions. There can be no outcasts. It's not just for those we like or agree with. It's not woke. It's not politically correct. It's not Pollyanna prose. It's certainly not partisan, and it is non-negotiable. It is a covenant we have made with God, and I will bring us back to this over and over again. This covenant also calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves because we are a part of each other. And just like that widow, nobody should give up their place in this community just because somebody else has an opinion about it. To draw from my own words to you last week, remember that everyone around you may experience the days, months, and years ahead differently, based on the reality of their lives. There are different things at stake for different people in our community. The people sitting next to you may have more or less on the line than you do with what comes next. Remember that and be gentle with them and with yourself. Take every opportunity to remain open and to offer love rather than judgment. And remember that we are all part of one blessed and beloved human family. And each of us individually and all of us collectively are loved by a God who delights in our existence. And no election can ever change that. Friends, I don't know what all the answers are for our nation. I so wish that I did. Yet, I sincerely believe that if we can do this here in our congregation and in this Santa Clarita community, then at least the rest of the country has a shot. And in the words of Broadway's Alexander Hamilton, I am not throwing away my shot. Are you?